You know that feeling, right? Just looking at this huge stack of information, books, articles, whatever, and you just wish someone could, like, cut through it all.
Oh, absolutely. Just give me the core stuff. We're drowning in information, but maybe not always understanding.
That's exactly it. And that's what we try to do here on the deep dive. We grab those sources and pull out the really key insights, the connections you might miss.
Get you informed fast.
Exactly. And today, we are tackling a big one, F.A. Hayek's Law, Legislation, and Liberty. It's this massive 3-volume work.
Yeah, and it wasn't something he just dashed off. This took him nearly, what, 20 years?
Almost 2 decades, yeah. He was apparently trying to build on his earlier book, The Constitution of Liberty, fill in some gaps.
And it really digs deep. I mean, foundations of society, what law even is, and maybe most importantly, the limits of our ability to consciously design social systems.
So our mission today, even though the source is pretty hefty, is kind of simple. Break down this complex stuff. What are the absolute must-know ideas from Hayek about how societies work, how law develops, and, what happens when we think we can plan everything?
Right. Let's dive in. Where should we start? Maybe with the most basic distinction he makes.
Yeah, the 2 kinds of order. That seems fundamental to everything else.
Definitely. He talks about made orders versus grown orders.
He uses those Greek terms too, doesn't he? Taxis and cosmos.
That's right. Taxis for the made, cosmos for the grown. And order itself, he just means a state where things are arranged so you can, like, see a part and have a decent guess about the rest. Some predictability.
Okay, so a made order, a taxis, that's like
Yeah.
an army formation.
Yeah.
Or a company org chart. Someone designed it for a purpose.
Exactly. There's a planner, a specific goal. It's an organization. But a grown order, the cosmos, that's different. It just emerges.
Emerges how?
From lots of individuals just following certain rules, interacting with each other. But nobody planned the overall pattern. It wasn't designed for one single overarching purpose.
It's like the way paths get worn across a park.
Mhm.
Or language developing. Nobody sat down and designed English grammar from scratch.
Precisely. Or even how the complex market functions. And Hayek's big point is, a lot of the really important order in society is this grown kind. It exists without a creator.
Okay, makes sense. Made versus grown. But why is this distinction so critical for him?
Well, because he thinks we constantly get them confused.
Yeah.
And a lot of that confusion comes from what he calls constructivist rationalism.
Okay, that sounds like academic jargon. Break that down. Constructivist rationalism.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mouthful. But the core idea is pretty straightforward. It's the belief that all useful social institutions are, and maybe more importantly, ought to be, the product of conscious, deliberate design.
So the thinking is,
Yeah.
if it works, someone must have designed it. And if we have a problem, we just need smart people to design the solution.
That's the intuition, yeah. Reason equals conscious construction. He connects it to thinkers like Descartes, though maybe more pointedly in the social sphere, to someone like Hobbes, who really tried to engineer a social order from rational principles.
Okay, and Hayek thinks this is wrong. Problematic.
Fundamentally flawed is how he puts it, on 2 levels, really. First, just factually.
Factually.
Yeah, he argues many of our most crucial institutions, language, morals, markets, much of law, they just weren't designed. They evolved over time. History shows that.
Okay, hard to argue with language on that one.
Yeah.
No committee invented verbs.
Right. And second, normatively. Meaning, even if we could, trying to make all social order depend on deliberate design is actually harmful.
Harmful how?
Because it ignores or actively prevents us from using the massive amount of knowledge that's scattered throughout society, knowledge held by millions of different people.
Oh, okay, this connects to his famous ideas about knowledge, doesn't it?
Exactly. It brings us straight to what he calls our necessary ignorance, or sometimes incurable ignorance.
Necessary ignorance. Sounds a bit fatalistic. We're all ignorant of lots of things.
Yes, but the key here isn't just general ignorance. It's ignorance of the particular facts of time and place. The little details known only to specific individuals right then and there, but which, in aggregate, affect the whole system.
Like knowing the specific conditions at a local shop, or a specific skill someone has.
Precisely that kind of thing. Think about the price of, I don't know, coffee beans. It reflects weather in Brazil, shipping costs, demand in Seattle, 1,000 tiny factors known only partially by different people involved in the chain. No single person knows it all.
Right, the dispersed knowledge problem, that was central to his economics too.
Absolutely. And the crucial insight here is that a spontaneous order, like a market, actually works because it can adapt and coordinate based on these millions of scattered bits of information that no single mind, no planner, could ever possibly gather and process.
So the constructivist rationalists, the ones who want to design everything.
They're essentially acting as if they do have all that knowledge, or as if they could get it. They ignore this fundamental limit, this necessary ignorance. And Hayek argues this desire to design everything stems from a kind of mistaken view of the human mind itself, seeing it as something outside of evolution capable of designing reality from scratch, rather than being a product of evolution, just like our social institutions.
Okay, so if institutions evolve, let's talk more about that. Hayek points out an old way of thinking about this that was kind of misleading, right? The Greek thing.
Yeah, the old distinction, physi versus nomo, or dise.
Meaning by nature versus by convention or by deliberate decision. Nature versus artifice. What's wrong with that? Seems intuitive.
The problem was it created a false choice. Either something was natural, like a tree, or it was deliberately made by humans, like a statue. It missed a whole category.
Which was?
The crucial third category. The one highlighted by those 18th century thinkers, Mandeville, Hume, Adam Ferguson.
Ah, Ferguson's famous phrase. The result of human action, but not of human design.
Exactly that. And this is huge, because so many important things, markets, money, language, law, morals, fall into this category. They're products of what people do, but nobody planned them. Understanding them requires a totally different approach, a different kind of social theory.
And that realization kicked off the whole evolutionary approach to thinking about society.
Pretty much. You can trace its development through things like the English common law tradition, where judges discovered rather than made law. Then the Scottish Enlightenment guys like Smith and Ferguson analyzing how complex order emerges. Burke's emphasis on tradition. The German historical school looking at gradual development. Savigny on law. Maine on ancient institutions. Menger on how money evolves. Even cultural anthropology studying how customs spread. They were all grappling with this puzzle. How does functional order arise without a designer?
Okay, so if law itself is one of these evolved things, partly grown, what does that mean for how we should think about law today? Is it mostly grown or made now?
Well, Hayek argues our language kind of trips us up here. We developed language when the main model of order was the designed kind, the small tribe, the household. So we tend to use anthropomorphic language, like saying society decided or the law intends.
Right, as if there's a single mind behind it. The market wants.
Exactly. So we default to thinking of law as something purely made, deliberately created. He contrasts the actual evolution of law growing out of ingrained habits, abstract rules people followed often, without even articulating them, with the modern idea that law is only what a legislator consciously wills.
And that second view, that law is just what the person in charge says it is. That's legal positivism.
Basically, yes. And Hayek sees legal positivism as a direct outcome of that constructivist way of thinking. The intentionalist fallacy, he calls it. The mistake of assuming everything useful must have been intended.
So he thinks legal positivism clashes with how law actually developed.
He argues it does. Historically, he points out, even in ancient Athens, people distinguished between the fundamental evolved laws, nomoi, and everyday decrees. In medieval times, the king wasn't seen as making law, but as finding or restoring existing customs.
So the idea of the government just creating law wholesale is relatively new.
Relatively new and linked, he argues, to the rise of absolute monarchy and later unlimited democracy. It crucially confused two different things. The general rules of just conduct between individuals, the evolved law, the rules of the game, and the rules of organization for the government itself, how the administration should run.
Ah, so the rules for running the state got mixed up with the rules for how citizens interact.
Precisely. And this changes everything, especially the role of a judge. In the older evolutionary view, the judge's job was to apply the existing general principles, the customs, the grown law. They were meant to ensure the rules people relied upon were upheld.
Not to achieve a specific outcome.
Exactly. Their job wasn't to second-guess the rules or decide cases based on what seemed expedient or would produce the best result for society in that specific instance. Even if applying the rules seemed harsh in one case, their focus was the integrity of the rules themselves, the framework that everyone could count on.
Okay, upholding the rules of the game, not trying to engineer the score in each match.
That's a good way to put it. And this difference, upholding rules of a spontaneous order versus directing an organization towards specific goals, is super clear when we look at the market.
The market as a cosmos, his other term, Catallaxy.
Yes, catallaxy. He preferred that term. It's from a Greek word, katalatane, and it's a great word because it means to exchange, but also to admit into the community and even to turn an enemy into a friend.
Wow, okay, so the word itself suggests more than just buying and selling. It's about social integration.
It really does. And this catallaxy, this market order, is fundamentally different from an economy in the strict sense, like a household budget or a company's plan.
Also,
An economy, like your household, has a single hierarchy of goals. You decide what's most important to spend money on. A company decides its production targets. The catallaxy doesn't have that.
right, millions of people, millions of different goals, often conflicting goals.
Exactly. The market order serves this multiplicity of individual ends. What it requires isn't agreement on ends, but agreement on the means to the general rules of conduct, like property rights, contract law, honesty.
So the goal of policy in a free society, for Hayek, isn't about achieving specific, predictable outcomes for particular people.
No. The core insight, he argues, is that the aim should be to preserve and improve the abstract order, the rules of the game, which increases the chances for unknown people to pursue their own unknown goals. Trying to judge the market based on how well it achieves some predefined list of outcomes is missing the point, he thinks. And it's kind of circular because what we value is partly shaped by the market process itself.
And the market is also the mechanism for using all that scattered knowledge we talked about earlier.
Absolutely. He calls it a discovery procedure. It's constantly discovering and adapting to new information through trial and error. Prices act as signals. People adjust their plans based on feedback. It's how the system copes with constant, unpredictable change using knowledge nobody centrally possesses.
So you can't judge it by comparing its results to some perfect plan nobody could have made anyway.
Right. You judge it by whether the rules allow that discovery process to happen effectively.
Okay, this leads us inevitably to one of the most contested concepts he tackles. And again, we need to just report impartially on his argument from the source here.
Yeah.
Social justice.
Yes, the famous mirage of social justice. It's vital to understand why he calls it a mirage, based on his framework of spontaneous order.
Why a mirage?
Yeah.
What's the core argument? It feels intuitive to want fairness in outcomes.
His argument, derived directly from the source, is that the concept of justice simply doesn't apply to the overall pattern of results that emerge from a spontaneous process like the market.
Doesn't apply. Why not?
Because, he argues, the outcome for any specific person is a mix of skill, effort, choices, and pure chance or circumstances utterly beyond their control, shifts in demand, new inventions, luck. It's the result of millions of interactions and dispersed facts. So, demanding that this overall pattern of outcomes be just according to some external standard is, for him, nonsensical. It's like calling the weather unjust.
So justice applies to how people act within the rules.
Exactly. Just conduct. No fraud, no violence, honoring contracts. Those are actions individuals take. But the distribution that results from everyone following those rules in a complex, unpredictable system isn't something that can be called just or unjust in itself, according to this view.
There's no one distributing the wealth. It just emerges from interactions.
That's the key point. There's no agent, no person or committee committing an act of social injustice in a spontaneous market outcome. And crucially, he argues, there's no set of specific rules for individual behavior that could guarantee a particular just pattern of results for everyone.
This is obviously a very charged topic. We're just outlining Hayek's specific line of reasoning here from the text.
Absolutely. And it's crucial to add a nuance he makes clear in the source. He is not arguing against helping people who are struggling.
Okay.
He explicitly says that providing some kind of basic minimum income, a safety net outside the direct workings of the market, is perfectly compatible with a free society and the rule of law.
Right. So a safety net is okay, but trying to engineer market outcomes to be socially just is not. What's the difference for him?
The difference, he argues, lies in interference with the market's signaling function. A basic income floor doesn't necessarily distort the price signals that tell people where their efforts are most needed or valued by others. Market incomes, for Hayek, are primarily signals for future action, not rewards for past merit.
So it's about remuneration as information, not reward.
Yes. If you try to have an authority determine incomes based on what seems just or deserved, you break that information system. You disrupt the very mechanism that allows the spontaneous order to adapt and coordinate using dispersed knowledge.
Got it. So even seemingly undeserved high or low incomes play a role in steering resources and effort.
That's his point. They are part of the feedback mechanism, reflecting changing circumstances and guiding adaptation, even if it feels unfair to the individuals involved. It's how the system processes novelty and ignorance.
Okay, let's shift focus a bit. How do these ideas about spontaneous order and limited knowledge apply to our political systems, to modern democracy?
Hayek saw problems there too, right?
Oh, definitely. He argued that many problems stem from what he called the unlimited character of modern democracy,
Limited character.
meaning the dominant idea that the elected majority can and should do basically whatever it decides. This comes, he thinks, from confusing the two tasks, making general rules of just conduct, legislation, and directing government resources and administration, government, when the same assembly does both without clear limits.
You get problems. Like what?
It leads to what he termed a bargaining democracy.
Okay, what's that? Instead of being guided by general principles or the common good, the government becomes a kind of marketplace for special interests. To keep a majority, coalitions have to constantly make deals, granting specific benefits to various organized groups, the swing groups, in return for their support.
So it's less about universal rules and more about log rolling and pleasing specific constituencies.
Exactly. My group supports your subsidy if your group supports my tariff. It becomes about distributing favors using government power rather than upholding impartial rules. And because the legislative and governmental functions are fused, the bodies designed for administration end up creating rules, often tailored to benefit specific groups, blurring accountability.
And this idea that the majority rules absolutely, that's the constructivistic superstition he mentioned.
He called it that, yes. Believing that power ultimately comes from the deliberate will of the majority, rather than from the underlying agreement on fundamental rules. It's another facet of assuming all order must be deliberately constructed. He also points to things like public finance issues. When people feel like someone else is paying the taxes for the benefits they want, it encourages endless demands on the government.
Government money needs protection from the government itself, as you put it somewhere.
Something like that, yeah. Implying a need for stricter constitutional rules about spending and taxation to counteract these tendencies.
This connects to an even deeper level in his thought, doesn't it? About cultural evolution and our basic human instincts.
Yes, this is a really fascinating and maybe unsettling part of the argument in the later volumes. He suggests that the abstract rules needed for the Great Society, this large, impersonal, modern society based on spontaneous order, had to be learned culturally.
Rules like respecting the property of strangers or abstract contracts.
Exactly. Rules that allow cooperation between people who don't know each other. And he argues these learned abstract rules often clash with our deeper innate instincts.
Instincts evolved for what?
For life in small, tight-knit tribal groups. Instincts like solidarity with known members, aiming for visible, common goals, sharing based on need within the group, suspicion of outsiders.
So the things that helped us survive in small bands actually work against the principles needed for a large, complex, open society.
That's the tension he identifies. Extending cooperation requires replacing those strong particular bonds with weaker, universal, abstract rules. This allows for wider cooperation, but maybe leaves, as he suggests, an emotional gap.
And he sees the push for social justice using government power to enforce specific outcomes as a kind of throwback.
He calls it an atavism, a resurgence of those ancient tribal emotions. It's the desire to impose the logic of the small, deliberately organized group onto the great society, where in his view it doesn't fit and is actually destructive to the spontaneous order that makes that larger society possible.
So our evolved psychology might be subtly rebelling against the abstract nature of modern freedom and markets. Wow. Did he offer any way forward? Any solutions, particularly for the political problems?
Towards the end, he sketches out some quite radical ideas for constitutional reform, mainly aimed at properly separating those powers, the rulemaking power, from the administrative power.
How would that work? Different government bodies.
Yeah, he proposed having distinct assemblies. One, a truly legislative assembly, solely focused on creating general universal rules of just conduct, and itself limited by a higher constitution defining what constitutes a just rule.
Okay, so a dedicated rulemaking body. And the other?
A governmental assembly responsible for the day-to-day business of administration, providing public services, managing resources. But this body would be constrained both by the Constitution and by the general rules laid down by the Legislative Assembly.
So like a three-tier system. Constitution sets the meta rules, legislature sets the general rules of conduct, government executes specific tasks within those rules.
That's the basic idea. A structure designed to prevent the government from bending rules for expediency and prevent the rule makers from trying to achieve specific outcomes for specific groups.
That is quite a system. We've covered a massive amount of ground here. From the basic idea of spontaneous versus made order,
Cosmos versus taxes.
right, through the limits of knowledge, the evolution of law and markets, his critique of constructivism.
The whole social justice debate, the problems in democracy, even down to our tribal instincts versus the Great Society.
It really does all seem to hang together around that core distinction, doesn't it, between the emergent order and the designed organization.
And the danger, as he saw it, of applying the logic of one to the other, particularly judging spontaneous orders by the standards of deliberate design.
Trying to force market outcomes to fit a preconceived notion of fairness, for example, misunderstands how markets work and risks breaking them.
It risks undermining the discovery process and the coordination that relies on dispersed knowledge and adaptation. These systems, markets, law, language, they're incredibly complex, evolved things, fragile in a way.
So wrapping this up, maybe the thought to leave you with is this. If Hayek's right, or even partly right, that our gut feelings or deep instincts often pull us towards the logic of the small group, the visible goal, the known community, how do we consciously maintain and defend the abstract rules and institutions needed for this huge, complex, often impersonal modern world?
Yeah, how do we navigate that tension? What does it really mean to accept outcomes generated by fair rules, even when those outcomes feel arbitrary or unjust on a personal level? That's a deep challenge.